So let's expand on this concept of justice that I think, again, I think Fowler's help with this is, I'm indebted to her for it because I think it helps me to think about my own teaching, because the Bible, if it is to be anything, I think is to have some kind of, it needs to have some kind of practical way in which it cashes out for us. And forgive me as I get right up there close and personal as I adjust myself in the seat. So I mentioned in the last lecture that the idea of justice is paramount for the prophets. Man, we could look at so many different Old Testament prophets. And why are we in the Old Testament again if I said I'm going to try to devote myself to Luke Acts? Well, because Luke Acts, really all of the New Testament, but certainly Luke Acts pays attention to the Old Testament. And I want to make sure that we bring that into the conversation, because what the writer of Luke does is build on what's gone before, stands on the shoulders of the prophetic tradition. So probably in terms of the written prophetic books, the book of Isaiah stands out as of chief importance. Not to say that there is one book of the Old Testament that's more important than another, but certainly the book of Isaiah has rightly gone through a lot of study and informs much in the New Testament. So I want to unpack something from that. So a couple of key texts from the book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 17 says this: "Learn to do good, seek justice, reprove the ruthless." Okay, so right after seeking justice, right after saying learn to do good, this is what it seems to me that it means for Isaiah to do that. Reprove the ruthless, defend the orphan, and plead for the widow. Okay, so one, make a break with those that are evil, and their evil is evidenced by a ruthless way of conducting their lives. Then the idea of the widow and the orphan, or the co-ideas of widows and orphans, are brought into the conversation. Now, why does Isaiah do this? Well, it's kind of a common Old Testament idea. In fact, we're going to, in a subsequent talk, we're going to talk about the book of James, because James talks about the widow and the orphan as well. The widow and the orphan, while can be taken literally, and probably should. I mean, I don't think Isaiah is saying that this is something so metaphorical that there aren't literal widows and literal orphans. I think he probably is thinking rather literally. But the widow and the orphan become code as well for those who are marginalized, for those who cannot fight for themselves, for those who cannot defend themselves. If you've read Fowler in chapters 3 and 4, and maybe more so in 3 than in 4, but I think 4, the provision in 4 builds on 3 in some really good ways. But if you've read Fowler, you know that issue of justice and pleading the case of and protecting and defending those who cannot protect and defend themselves, it's pretty important in her thinking. And so, I think it's worth unpacking a little bit in the book of Isaiah. So right there at the beginning, Isaiah sets out the case that this is what it means to seek justice and to do good. Deal with the ruthless, take care of the widow, take care of the orphan. That then informs his process when he comes to the issue of justice throughout these 66 chapters. When that issue is raised, the issue of justice, it tends to be within that context of helping, advocating for, defending those that cannot defend themselves. We don't just stay there, but here's some other examples. Isaiah chapter 11, verses 1 to 4. We find that the coming one, we can talk about Jesus here. There's this kind of messianic hope and expectation for the kingship to come to its ultimate conclusion. And Isaiah writes that this coming king, within the line of David from the Old Testament, this coming king will not judge by what he sees, but will judge with justice. All right, so what does the writer mean by that? That means that the coming one will not judge based on how people appear. It's easy to look at someone who is in fine clothing, who has the appearance of having their lives together, and whether that's because of wealth or just because of a sense of togetherness that we sometimes have in life, it's easy to say, well, this person must be in the right. And Isaiah says, well, this coming one is not going to judge that way. This coming one is going to judge on another basis, going to judge on the basis of, hi, Natasha, this is Natasha. Natasha's the secretary here at the school. So I'm going to pause and I'll come back to this in just a moment.